Hi guys, welcome back aboard good old Athena. This is my last week alone here in Mandelo. On Monday, Ava's flying out and hopefully she'll be bringing 2 refurbished autopilot drive units so we can continue our Atlantic crossing. That leaves me with a handful of days to take care of some boat projects and hopefully get the boat somewhat nice and tidy before Ava gets here. My name is Mess, this is my wife Ava. I've spent the last 5 years on a somewhat extensive refit of our 1987 Warrior 38 named Athena. That was a DIY fun-packed adventure complete with a very extensive osmosis treatment, building a new rudder using vacuum infusion, rebuilding the entire deck, gutting and subsequently rebuilding most of the interior, painting the topsides, and a ton of other projects. The summer of 2021 we started cruising full-time. Now we're finally ready to begin our adventure. There is something out here in the cockpit Ava's been wanting for a long time, and that's a cockpit table. Now I have some wood left over here from another woodworking project, and I think I might be able to cobble together a cockpit table. It's not going to be super pretty, but it's going to be a lot better than what we have now, which is nothing. I scoured the local hardware stores for hinges earlier today, stainless or brass. The closest I could get was this piano hinge, so yeah, we'll make this work. If I can just get these 2 bits of wood here joined together and attached to the pedestal and come up with some kind of foldable leg situation, then we should have a usable cockpit table. It's not going to be super spiffy, but like I said, it'll be better than what we have now. Like I mentioned, this wood is left over from a different project, so unfortunately there's a bit missing here, but I do have this guy, which seems like he fits somewhat neatly in here. This is not a tight fit by any stretch of the imagination, so we're definitely in thickened epoxy territory here to take up some of the gaps. I mixed up a little bit of West Systems 105 epoxy with their slow hardener and added some 406 to thicken the epoxy. To not get epoxy everywhere in the cockpit, I applied a little bit of masking tape to the top of the table and then slathered on copious amounts of thickened epoxy before smushing in place the middle piece of wood. Through the magic of video editing, we can fast forward until the next morning when the epoxy had cured enough for me to move on. As you can see here, there's a lot of squeeze out and the surface is pretty rough. Now I am very limited in the tools I have aboard, so I grabbed my ankle grinder with an old, very worn 36 grit disc. Please note that this is not a flappy disc, it's one of the flat ones, and this is a very aggressive procedure, so it requires a very light touch to not wreck the surface. After having gotten rid of the worst of the imperfections, I used 80 grit to get rid of any swirl marks left behind by Mr. Ankle Grinder. Before doing anything else, I wanted to square up the ends, and again here I am a little limited in my selection of tools. My only real option is my jigsaw. Much like Mr. Ankle Grinder, not really the best tool for the job, but it's all I've got. I decided to knock down the middle piece of wood to make the bottom flat, so I put a fresh 36 grit disc on Mr. Angle Grinder, and here you can see just how aggressive Mr. Angle Grinder can be, generating tons of man glitter in mere seconds. To dull the edges, I broke them with a bit of sandpaper and a block of wood. So far, so good. I think this is going to work out fairly well. The table is only temporary. We'll swap it out for something nicer once we're in the US, so I don't want to commit to drilling the wrong holes in the pedestal and decided to use a little piece of sapelli to secure the hinge. The long-time viewer will know my disdain for drilling stainless by hand. It is the armpit of DIY jobs. Anywho, I measured and double-checked my measurements before committing to the hole placement. Why is drilling stainless by hand such a pain, you might ask? Oh, for many reasons. Here's one. There's a long list of reasons, but let's not take a deep dive into depression right now. After copious amounts of oh cursed drilling and swearing in Danish, I had 2 holes in the pedestal. I rounded over the edges on my sacrificial hinge mount and got it precisely positioned on the pedestal before marking the position of the holes on the back and pre-drilling them. A bit of Sikaflex should do a good job of helping to secure the sapelli along with a couple of beefy screws. I got the hinge mounted on the pedestal and decided it was my time to attempt to win a Darwin Award. There's no way this could possibly have gone sideways. Still, armed with all of my teeth, I was pretty pleased with the progress so far. The last hurdle was to figure out the leg situation. Unfortunately, this will have to involve a foldable leg for now. I'm sure we can come up with a better solution in the US. So far, so good. We now have a working cockpit table aboard Athena. Now, the solution for the leg situation is a little bit of a hack. The table leg can fold up and out of the way, but it does have a little bit of a hair trigger. If there are butterflies flapping their wings nearby, this is a little bit of a danger zone. I've come up with a temporary solution, and that is this guy right here. If we put this down, and then the leg won't collapse so easily. But yeah, this is not going to be a long-term solution. A little bit of a hack, but that's fine. At least now we have a working cockpit table, so we can have people over for drinks and stuff when we get to the Caribbean, provided not everybody has left by the time we get there. Of course, it would have been nice with a table that folds out so there's a little bit more room on the table, but yeah, this is the best I could do with what I had. While sailing, we'll most likely keep the table in the stowed away position like it is here. I've used a little bit of bungee cord down there to make sure it doesn't rattle and bang around. I'm really excited to see what Ava's gonna think about the new temporary cockpit table. I think she's gonna be excited. And there are also the two surprises from last week's video for her, the light in the hanging locker and her own little charging USB plug on her side of the bed. This should come as a surprise for absolutely nobody. I really like working on the boat, doing these little small projects and stuff like that. But there is one thing about working on the boat that I absolutely despise. And that is moving shite around continuously. The next little mini project is going to be to install this trim in the aft cabin here. But to be able to do that, I need to move all of this shite here somewhere else. Most likely that means moving all of the stuff from the aft cabin onto the settee for a few hours until I have the trim up, and then I can move all of that stuff back into the aft cabin. But it doesn't stop there, because I'll also have to move all of the stuff that's here on the V-berth into the aft cabin, because I need to get some sapelli that's underneath the V-berth for some trim here in the forward cabin. You may think that doesn't sound all that bad, but if past performance is any indication, it'll only be a matter of seconds after having moved everything into the aft cabin before I realize that there's something underneath the bunk in the aft cabin that I need for one of the projects. I know, we're kind of in champagne problem territory here, but after having done this continuous shuffle of stuff around the boat for years, it just gets a little bit old. But yeah, well, let's go ahead and get started. After having cleared out the aft cabin, I crawled in there to measure the angle for the trim, and while I was in there I also got a rough measurement for the length using my laser. After a couple of cuts and a couple of test fits along with a bit of fine adjustments, I finally had a nice snug fit that I could sand to get rid of the squeeze out from the epoxy. I marked the position of the holes, spacing them out uniformly, and busted out my 10mm Forstner bit. Sadly, I am completely out of 10mm wooden bungs to hide the screws, so I can't add those today, but at least I'll be ready for them. I added a bit of Sikaflex to the back of the trim piece to make sure it'll never creak, but also to make sure you can't see light coming through in case I can't pull it completely flush with the cockpit combing. Before I left the aft cabin, I made sure to sort through all of the stuff underneath the bunk to make sure there was nothing I would need later this week. Then there was just a small matter of shoving everything back into the aft cabin. So far, so good. We now have the trim installed in the aft cabin. I think the only thing I need to do to actually finish the aft cabin is to put up the headliner that's going to hide the bottom of the deck and the bottom of the cockpit combing. Like I mentioned in last week's video, the headliner in the rest of the boat is not really done either. We're holding off on doing that until we get to the US in the summer, where we'll have an easier time getting hold of materials and stuff. So the aft cabin will have to wait until then. While I was going through the storage underneath the bunk in the aft cabin, I found this piece of trim. This is supposed to sit up here to hide the chain plate for the staysail. I've come across this piece of trim maybe 10 times since we left Denmark, but each time I've had it in my hand, I've decided not to put it up because it'll mean having to modify the headliner. That means sawdust, so I'll have to clear out the V-berth, and each time I've just figured, nah, I'll just hold off. But for the next mini project, I'm going to be putting up a little bit of sapelli trim here in the forward cabin, and that sapelli is underneath the V-berth, so I'll have to clear out all the mattress stuff anyways. So yeah, we can go ahead and put this up. Our mattress setup is straight out of the Princess and the Pea. There are no less than 5 layers of stuff hiding underneath the sheet, which makes for a very comfortable and dry bed, but also means accessing the storage below is a little bit annoying. I did a bunch of test fitting and tiny modifications to the trim piece to make it fit. In the process of doing that, it turned out that I needed to flip 3 of the 4 bolts that secure the chain plate to make the trim fit. I am so glad I installed a light in the chain locker last week. I only flipped 1 bolt at a time, so I didn't bother loosening the staysail, and it was a smooth and undramatic process. With all the nuts facing into the chain locker, the trim finally fit, and I got it secured by 4 screws. Job done. Before putting the mattress madness back in place, I remembered to get the sapelli out. This is going to cover up the section of the hull next to the hanging locker. I grabbed a quick measurement for the angle and the length of the sapelli slats. I made a quick little test to see that I wasn't miles off, and then set to work marking and also cutting all of the slats. Not all of them were quite long enough, but it'll all work out in the end. After a couple of minutes worth of treasure hunting for screws, I pre-drilled all of the holes to make sure the wood won't splinter, and also to make sure that all of the screws will line up. Then it was a simple matter of installing these slats on the side of the hull to cover the insulation. Ta-da! Slats in place. That looks pretty dang spiffy. Now keep in mind that the headliner is not done, so that's why it's sagging a little bit up there. I do think it looks really nice that the area up there now matches all of the other exposed areas of hull we have on the boat. But yeah, we have been sailing around with that sapelli since we left Denmark. Normally we keep these bins up there, and that kind of blocks the view of the insulation, so it's not like we've really been missing it. But it is really nice that the boat is now matching. Now you may be able to see that there are a couple of the slats there that are a little bit on the short side. That is unfortunate, but it's not the end of the world, because there's a piece of plywood that's supposed to go here to cover up the chain plate, and with that in place, even the shortest of the slat is plenty long. I'll add that piece of plywood to the to-do list for the upcoming summer, when we also take care of the headliner. Now, while I was rummaging around for the sapelli, I found this little vent guy here for our freezer. As you might be able to tell by the crusty, rusty label here, this is also something we've been sailing around with since we left Denmark. Athena's freezer is located here in the forward cabin. I don't want to say my relationship with the freezer is a love-hate relationship, because it's honestly more like a mildly annoyed-hate relationship. The freezer is one of those top-loading drop-in things from Isotherm. It is hideously overpriced, and it's poorly engineered. As you can tell, I haven't secured the wooden part of the counter here to the insulation yet, and there's a good reason for that. This is so poorly insulated that we end up with condensation on the top of this, which then causes this wood to warp. So yeah. In fact, if we put a shirt or maybe like a towel on top of this here, then we will get condensation between the towel in this case and the wood. The freezer goes down to minus 20 degrees Celsius, and this is the thickness of the insulation. This is a frickin' scam. There is no way that was ever not gonna cause an issue. Even back in Denmark at 15 degrees Celsius, this thing was still having issues with condensation on the outside of the insulation. So yeah, I'm thoroughly disappointed with Isotherm for putting out a product like that. But I do have a fix in mind. Maybe if I can get my hands on like a custom-made, relatively thin vacuum panel, and then combine the thickness of the insulation and the countertop, so we'll have a little bit more room for insulation, then at least we should be able to get rid of the condensation issue. Anywho, when I installed the freezer, we didn't have time to put in this little vent thing, so I just drilled a big round hole here to allow the compressor to breathe a little bit. But yeah, let's go ahead and chuck this guy in there instead. One of the funny little things I learned about Athena during the refit is that the sole in the forward cabin is not level. It has an ever so slight tilt upwards, forward, most likely to compensate for the curvature of the hull. So I use the countertop as my reference for level. As you saw, it was a nice snug fit, but to make sure the thing doesn't pop out when we're sailing, I just used a couple of dabs of Sikaflex. That'll make it easy to remove it once we start varnishing all of these trim pieces in the US. I only have about 2 days until Ava shows up now, and I would like to get the boat a little bit more tidy and clean before she gets here. So I'm gonna cut this video a little bit short. If everything goes according to plan, then the next video you guys will see will be part 1 of the air conditioning install. As you can see here behind me, the vent is already installed. I shot part 1 of that series about a week or 2 ago, and Ava's bringing some stuff I need to be able to finish the installation and also to be able to make part 2. So if she brings those stuff and it's the right stuff and everything, then I'll be able to make part 2, and then we'll publish part 1 as the next video. Sorry about the continuity issue and the confusion, but yeah, it's not been super easy to get a hold of stuff here in Mendello, so hopefully it all works out. And on that hopeful note, I will end this week's video here. I hope to see all of you guys back here about Athena next week for, well, hopefully some air conditioning installed. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, please remember to leave a like. See you!